I want to go a bit deeper into ecology. I want to argue today for the agency of ecology in conceiving, framing, and informing the contemporary metropolis. Here I refer to ecology not just as a green environmental palliative for the urban or metropolitan environment, but as an instigator of a set of interrelated social, ecological, cultural, infrastructural, economic dynamics that unfold and accumulate over a period of years and decades. I see the potential of ecology to be a more complex and more provocative, informing and formative idea and force for how cities are made, for how cities actively evolve, reshape themselves, and are reshaped through time. But before I get there, I think it's important to step back a few decades to understand developments in the field of ecology and those developments in relationship to planning and design practices. For me, contemporary ideas of ecology and planning can be traced to the work of Ian McHarg in the 60s and 70s, in which analysis and assessment of natural resources, geology, soils, water, habitat, etc., could inform the best places and ways to develop land for social occupation. While the methodology can be easily criticized for its claims with regard to objectivity and for its objectification of landscape components as things simply to be mapped and quantified, McHarg's methodology and practice opened up planning thought to the idea of the interconnectedness between cities and suburbs and the natural world, design with nature. Perhaps McHarg's use of the term propinquity, nearness, affinity, kinship, best characterizes his sense of this relationship between human and non-human worlds. But even as his methodology was taking hold, new ideas about ecology were emerging. Richard Foreman's research during the 80s and early 90s developed new understandings of and new terminologies for ecological systems, which were now described as matrices, webs, and networks, for instance, and which were characterized by adjacencies, overlaps, and juxtapositions. This work importantly recognized the dynamic, living nature of ecological systems, not just the physical stuff McHarg was mapping, but how the stuff of the physical world supports the movement and exchange of ecological matter, water, seeds, wildlife. Others pushed these ideas further. In fact, the field was shifting away from an understanding of systems that attempt to achieve a predictable equilibrium or steady state condition to systems typically in states of change, adapting to subtle or dramatic changes in inputs, resources, and climate. Adaptation, appropriation, and flexibility became the hallmarks of successful systems. It's now understood that it is through ecosystems' ability to respond to changing environmental conditions that they persist. Now, this shift opened new worlds for critical discourse in design and urbanism. Stan Allen identified the new ecology along with engineering systems as important examples of material practices, which focused, he said, not so much on what things look like, but more on what they can do. His work in collaboration with James Corner and the ecologist Nina Marie Lister in Toronto's Downsview Park competition of the mid-90s imagined the setting up of physical scaffolds that would sponsor the propagation of emergent ecologies, natural systems that would be seeded initially and would evolve with an increasing level of complexity and adaptability over time. Even the brief for Downsview was important here, as it required entries to account for long-term time frames and a level of uncertainty with regard to project evolution. But what now? There's clearly some diversity in how these ideas have been applied to and inform design practices and thinking, and I want to just identify a few tendencies. First, ecology is a set of biological mechanisms. I refer here to the strategy of working with or alongside the stuff and processes of dynamic ecologies, the actual mechanics of how plants grow, behave, and adapt, the performance requirements of wildlife habitats, the movement and dynamics of the various waters present in a landscape. Like Corner and Allen and Lister, these strategies construct a set of physical scaffolds with varying conditions, low, high, wet, dry, sheltered, exposed, that can be appropriated over time by different plant communities impregnated on a site and by different forms of wildlife. Such strategies anticipate a number of possible futures that may emerge specifically in response to a set of potential environmental changes, climate warming, sea level rise, shifts in wind and moisture patterns, etc. In essence, a structuring of natural competition among plant communities in ways that will allow the larger setting and systems to respond, adapt, and be resilient to change. 2, ecology is a construction or hybridization. Here I refer to the development of responsive design systems that tap into environmental engineering and social dynamics simultaneously, systems that engage both human and non-human dynamics and forces. Such systems are open-ended in the multiple ways they engage large-scale environmental dynamics, rainfall and drought, lake level rise and fall, plant succession, etc. But they put human and non-human systems and elements into dialogue with one another. Stormwater collection, marsh replenishment, groundwater recharge, and steam pit generation, for instance. These are strategies of conflation of social ecological realms that reveal both their interdependence and their individuality. Third, ecology is an analog or a model. This third category includes projects that attempt to model the responsive behaviors of living systems in non-living constructions or processes, the abilities of living things, entire ecotones, individual organisms, human skin, to react to changing inputs and to adapt their nature to the new or revised conditions at hand. There are many examples you could cite in architecture. Just one is this installation by Chuck Holberman recently at the GSD at Harvard called Adaptive Fritting, a glass wall with movable fritted panels that changes it as inputs, light levels fluctuate, creates spaces, environments that shift. Now, in landscape and civic space, we might think of the design of flexible social spaces, physical scaffolds for the playing out of open-ended but not unlimited social and cultural activities and even extreme environmental changes. And in large-scale complex urban projects, we might imagine the setting up of responsive administrative frameworks, if-then scenarios, and management strategies that allow for feedback loops, input, and responsiveness over time. Such an approach renders urban planning and design as a responsive timeline rather than a prescriptive master plan. Now, currently, in studios at Harvard and in my practice at Stoss, we're playing these ideas out in both large-scale metropolitan conditions and in more densely developed urban conditions. And we see this in two ways. First, primarily in speculative research studios at Harvard, we're interested in understanding ecology as a set of biological processes and as an adaptive analog in structuring recovery strategies for large-scale infrastructures. In this case, a demilitarizing or remilitarizing air-based training ground on the outskirts of a large North American metropolis. Some of these proposals utilize requisite remediation processes and ongoing training operations as change agents for ecological succession, diversification, and adaptation, as in this project by Gina Worth. Other projects use chemical, biological, and ecological processes to catalyze transformation of the site in ways that take on social, cultural, urbanistic complexity. This is a strategy for milkweed propagation for both habitat and for an emerging organic clothing industry by Chris Tuccio. And a project that utilizes cut and fill operations associated with soil cleansing operations as a platform for switchgrass agriculture and other forms of social and metropolitan occupation. And then second, in our own work at Stoss, we look to ecology as a driver or framework for new high-density, hybridized urbanism, often in the center of the city. And so while I recognize some of the trends that Alan's pointing out in terms of the lateral spread of American or North American urbanism, we also recognize, as do our clients, that there are instances where cities are interested in remaking themselves and becoming more dense. A site like this on the Toronto waterfront, we encountered displaced ecologies, the diminished viability of a river. You can see this river coming from the upper right and taking an odd 90-degree turn toward the lake. Rivers don't usually do that. All of this infrastructure, these odd environmental conditions amplify problems of flooding, decay, and access within this urban environment. So here was an opportunity to reestablish this river and its marshland as primary forces behind Toronto's emerging waterfront. And I'll just go into a little bit of detail on this project here. First, in order to really understand the river, we needed to understand the scale and the functioning of the river mouth. This is a big marshland in green that used to occupy the mouth, used to accommodate all the sediment and flow coming from this enormous watershed. That was erased when the Portlands were filled. And so part of the strategy is really to reestablish the footprint of the river marsh in order to put it first. And it's a critical issue. We needed to understand the dynamics, the ecologies, and physical needs of this river. We needed to understand its performance criteria, and then use this knowledge as a basis for building viable and vital landscape and urban fabrics. So the project wasn't simply to site a new urban district next to the mouth of the river, but actually to figure out a way to allow the river to structure that urban environment. We did this by setting up a series of principles and parts for flexible deployment. You can see a number of the principles here, but we needed to develop strategies for multiple systems. Key was establishing new river habitat by understanding the habitat requirements of the keystone species, in this case fish, to really engage the dynamics of this river and of the fluctuating lake levels. And yet also understanding that we're in a constricted urban environment and we needed to utilize soft engineering techniques to help structure this place. We also wanted to leverage the specific mechanisms of native plant communities already tuned to move back and forth quite rapidly over the course of months or years in response to these dynamic conditions, allowing the river to take over, spawning successional ecologies in response to short and long-term inputs, seeding new life into the lower Don. Even flood control became an opportunity here. River and lake fluctuations put in play a constantly evolving wash of low waters that are amplified by the marsh's shallow grade. Dry one month, entirely inundated the next. The spits can become temporary peninsulas that further emphasize the site's fluid occupations. We utilized similar tactics along the waterfront, breaking down a continuous harbor wall in order to once again experience a full range of interactions with water. We build in diversity and flexibility into the building fabric, buildings organized around the landscape, courtyard and landscape edge, active thresholds between built and landscaped environments. When built in combination, the buildings allow for the flow of landscape across and around the islands and spits. The strong effect of the naturalized landscape sets up a new openness in the building typologies. Landscape even turns up the face of buildings, rendering buildings as wildlife habitat, as high-performance green machines. Together, this becomes the new green city, diverse, robust, high-density, and hybridized, a new metropolitan precinct structured by the river and engaged in the rich dynamics of the emergent city, wild river ecologies that generate a robust urbanism. So in all of these, the idea is not simply to structure and set off a set of plant and animal ecologies that grow untended apart from direct human interference. Rather, the idea is to structure ways to interact with such dynamics directly and analogously, to curate an evolving set of ecological urbanistic impulses and interactions, not fully under one's control, yet which may be susceptible to productive pokes and prods or recalibrations in response to a set of social urbanistic theoretical intentions or evolving inputs. Here, the role of the designer or planner shifts to one of loose but enmeshed project producer, activated intermittently as conditions demand and as these intertwined and engaged systems grow and adapt. Most broadly, I think, ecologies can be generating forces, active though elusive agents in the structuring of the city and in the playing out of civic life, agents which physically, mechanically, and constructively engage the various advanced technologies, public policies, and social and cultural dynamics in play. In all of these, the appropriation of the machinery and resiliency and even the language of ecology and ecological systems in their multiple forms and manifestations as mechanisms and or models forms the basis for a newly charged set of design practices, flexible, responsive, and adaptable as projects evolve and accumulate over time. Thanks.